At the meeting, we are ready to go. We have a quorum and the witnesses have completed their sound checks. Therefore, I call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 30 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disability. Today's meeting is taking place again in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and attending virtually. I would ask that all members attending in person respect pandemic protocols that are in place. As well, to ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witness and members. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. For those participating by video conference, please click on the microphone icon to activate your mic.
Monsieur le Président, il n'y a pas de traduction.
Mr. Chair, I'm afraid I'm missing the translation into French.
When we have an issue with translation, please let me know. And Madame Shabat, is it corrected? Madame Shabat?
Oui, il n'y a pas de traduction en français.
Yes, I'm afraid I'm not hearing the translation into French.
Still not. She's not hearing it in French. Where's Chad? Okay, Madame Shabat, I will continue on. Please let me know if you're getting to. Okay, it's been corrected. Before the interruption, I
Thank you.
advise that you have the option to speak in the official language of your choice. If there is an issue with translation, please get my attention and we'll suspend while it's being corrected. As well, to get my attention for those virtually, please use the raised hand icon on the bottom of your surface to get my attention. We are resuming the meeting pursuant Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February the 3rd, 2022. The committee will resume its study of the Housing Accelerator Fund. I would like to welcome our witnesses to begin our discussions with 5 minutes of opening remarks, followed by questions. Kathy Huron, President, Alberta Municipalities. Jason Thorne, General Manager, Planning and Economic Development. Edward John, Director, Housing Services. They will be both giving statements because they were both to appear at two different times on two different issues, but they're both appearing today. As well, regroupement des offices d'habitation du Québec, Madame Demir, General Director, and Coralie Leroux, Senior Advisor. I would ask if you could just give me the proper interpretation when you speak of your name. We'll start with the Alberta Municipalities for 5 minutes. Madame Huron, you have the floor, please.
Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you for having me. My name is Kathy Heron, and I am the president of Alberta Municipalities, as well as the mayor of the city of St. Albert, who are about 70,000 people just north of Edmonton. So affordable housing is obviously a vital issue for municipalities, not just in Alberta, but everywhere. So I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to share Alberta's municipal perspective as you consider options for the design and rollout of the Housing Accelerator Fund. Alberta Municipalities sincerely appreciates the Government of Canada's work over the past few years on the housing file. because as municipalities, we know that adequate housing is essential to our citizens' health, safety, dignity, inclusion, and honestly, the ability to contribute to the fabric of our communities. So we strongly support the right to housing enshrined in the National Housing Strategy Act, and we applaud the federal government's significant investment to make this right a reality. Municipalities are at the forefronts of dealing with social and economic disorder that arises from homelessness and insecure or inappropriate housing. As a result, although housing is a provincial responsibility, when provincial policies and programs fail to resolve local housing issues, municipalities must do what they can to support their community and its well-being. Alberta is challenged by a high demand for and low supply of affordable housing, particularly the deep subsidy housing. Using the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation definitions, nearly 500,000 Albertans are living in unaffordable housing, and about 164,000 households are in core housing need. Only 57,000 households currently live in provincially supported affordable housing, and over 24,000 households are on provincial affordable housing wait lists. This means that 10% of Albertan households are in core housing need, but only 4% are receiving provincial assistance. Last year, the Government of Alberta announced a provincial housing strategy that aims to assist up to 25,000 more households in the next 10 years. This will be accomplished by delivering 13,000 additional affordable housing units and providing rental assistance for about 12,000 more households. While this represents a 44% increase in the number of households supported by the province, it still leaves over 83,000 households in core housing need. Furthermore, the province's capital plan shows investments in affordable housing decreasing by 27% over the next 2 years, which leaves us wondering how can they achieve the goal of developing 13,000 new units without the appropriate capital investment. Accordingly, the Housing Accelerated Fund represents a tremendous opportunity for Alberta municipalities to help address the urgent need. Alberta municipalities believes that flexibility is the key to making this fund as effective as possible. And municipalities are highly diverse in terms of their local housing markets, their local housing needs, and their capacity to adjust these needs. Local housing needs run across the affordable housing spectrum, from deep subsidy permanent supportive housing for people transitioning out of homelessness to the near market housing that makes life more affordable for middle-class families. So my first ask is that the Housing Accelerated Fund be as flexible as possible to support municipalities in addressing their own unique housing needs and priorities. We are the experts in local land use planning and understand the housing needs of our communities as well as the barriers to those housing developments. Granting municipalities the flexibility to spend funds on local priorities will ensure the goal of the Housing Accelerated Fund can be achieved. For example, several Alberta municipalities have existing programs designed to increase density and encouraging housing development. For these municipalities, the Housing Accelerated Fund should permit investment in those existing programs. This will allow municipalities to speed up housing approvals and increase housing supply. My second ask is that grants from the Housing Accelerated Fund include sufficient funding to allow for the construction of energy efficient homes as well as net zero homes, because ongoing maintenance and expenses of a house also contributes to the affordability. So having a common net zero energy and climate ready standard for all homes funded through this program will enable builders to learn and adopt the new practices needed to meet the future building code requirements designed to help address climate change. In closing, I would like to thank you once again for the opportunity to present and for your efforts to truly collaborate with municipalities in designing this important program. And I can now take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Herman. We will now move to Mr. Thorne for 5 minutes. And when we conclude all the witnesses, then we'll open the floor to questions. Mr. Thorne, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to the committee today. My name is Jason Thorne, and I'm the General Manager of Planning and Economic Development at the City of Hamilton. And in this role, I lead a department that's responsible for all aspects of planning approvals, as well as economic development, administering the city's development incentive programs, and for managing the city's real estate portfolio. And increasing annual housing production, addressing affordability, ensuring timely development approvals, building complete, livable, sustainable communities are all goals that my council has given to me and to my department. And so hopefully some of our experience will be of value to this committee. And I'm going to outline this morning 5 comments that I hope you'll consider as you develop this important program. First and foremost, I would urge you to be clear in the goals that you're hoping to achieve. And in my view, just building more of the same should not be that goal. I do agree with the urgency of increasing overall housing supply, but that alone will not address affordability, and that alone will not ensure that we achieve livable and sustainable communities. It's important not to lose sight of other key policy goals. It's important to increase housing supply in a manner that also meets the climate crisis and not incentivize energy inefficient housing or low density housing in far-flung car-dependent locations. It's also important to increase housing supply in a manner that actually targets affordability. Secondly, I'll talk about development approvals. Much can be done and should be done and is being done to streamline the development approvals process. But I'd caution you to be careful not to fall into the trap of thinking that widespread deregulation will somehow unlock housing supply. Much of the planning approvals process is in place to catch and correct issues with development that, if not caught, could have significant negative impacts. I can speak to you from the front lines of the planning approvals process, and I can tell you that there is significant public interest that is served in making sure that new development goes through a fulsome review. And even when done expeditiously, faster approvals does not necessarily equal new construction because municipalities are not able to compel that approved development actually happen. In Hamilton, we've already undertaken Lean Six Sigma reviews of our processes, shifted to digital portals for building permit submissions, pre-zoned most of our city, granted as of right permissions for secondary dwelling units like basement apartments and laneway housing. And we're currently preparing zoning changes to permit the conversion of existing homes into duplexes, triplexes, or fourplexes. That said, there are ways that the Housing Accelerator program could help. It can include funding for municipal staffing to carry out development reviews, support for digital application platforms, for municipal infrastructure and growth modeling, and efforts to expand the labor pool of professionals, such as planners and engineers who are in desperately short supply right now. My third comment for you relates to an area that I would recommend be a central plank of the Housing Accelerator program, and that's land and property acquisition. That means funding to support municipalities and nonprofit housing providers to acquire and assemble vacant or underutilized lands, de-risk them, and then get them onto the market as affordable and mixed market affordable housing. That also means funding to acquire existing market affordable rental units to protect our existing below market housing supply. Fourth, the program could add significant value by partnering with local municipalities in targeted development incentive programs. In Hamilton, we have 20 years of experience and success with using targeted incentive programs to bring housing to market. But right now, we're doing it entirely on our own. We offer zero interest loans, tax grants, development charge exemptions to incentivize development in market challenged areas, grant programs to clean up brownfields, fee incentives to create laneway homes and basement apartments, and grants for the adaptive reuse of heritage buildings. But these programs have been hugely successful in catalyzing development in our city, but all of them are funded solely by the municipality. I'll end with a fifth and final comment, and that is not to tie the program or the federal funding to arbitrary unit production goals. I would caution you to think carefully about going down the path of what I've heard referred to as dollars for doors. And I say this for a number of reasons. Pure quantity of units is not the only goal. These units must meet the needs of the market. They must provide housing for a mix of incomes, mix of tenures, mix of family types and household sizes. And they need to be designed and located in a manner that meets those other critical policy goals like climate change. Making funding dependent on delivering units could give developers significant leverage over municipalities in the approvals process. This could lead to pressure on municipalities to compromise important matters of public interest, such as environmental protections, in order to get builders to build so that municipalities can access federal funds. And a dollar for doors approach would put municipalities in an untenable situation with respect to the public that we serve. Residents would be looking to the municipality to make sound, principled planning decisions, while at the same time knowing that we would be, in effect, getting paid to say yes. So I leave those 5 comments with you for your consideration, and I'd be happy to take questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Mr. John, for 5 minutes.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Edward John. I'm the Director of Housing Services for the City of Hamilton in Ontario. I wish to thank you for this opportunity and look forward to continued engagement. As part of my duties, I am responsible for the housing system and service manager of the social and community housing portfolio. This includes oversight of the access to housing waitlist, application of provincial and federal funding to housing programs and systems, including our shelter and residential care facilities. I have comprehensive experience of several funding programs, both federally and provincially, including but not limited to Rapid Housing Initiative, Co-Investment, HPP, COCHI, and OFI. Following and during the pandemic, the housing system has witnessed numerous pressures and challenges and has shone a light on the inequity and housing gaps that face the most vulnerable of our community. Support and funding directed to address this increasingly disproportionate impact remains my focus, and hopefully today my comments and experience can assist the creation and implementation of this newly developing fund. With regard to the Housing Accelerator Fund priorities, as with many funding envelopes, I would strongly recommend that the program consider the following. Flexibility. As a federal program, it is important to allow the program to address local priorities and challenges with respect to the market conditions and housing need of the particular city. Hamilton still struggles to provide rental housing with much of our stock built in the 60s and 70s, and as such, at the end of its life cycle and in need of capital repair. Protecting both the quality and affordability of these units while providing new is a key priority for Hamilton. Predictability. Clearly, the intent is for an acceleration of supply and rapid delivery of units. As such, implementation will need to be simple and predictable to ensure the goal is met locally. Complex legal agreements and program requirements will hinder the speed and efficiency of delivery. Stackability. With supply being the focus, one can expect per unit funds to be significantly less than other funding approaches such as RHI. It would therefore be important to contemplate the ability for local municipalities to be in a position to stack programs in order for local priorities and the depth of affordability to be maximized. Definitions. Careful consideration on what is to be achieved will be a component of how the program defines outcomes such as affordability. Hamilton is in critical need of deep affordability and increased rental tenure. A program that support and not limit utilizing these funds for this purpose would be a huge advantage. In terms of where a city as Hamilton could invest such funding, I offer the following. From a policy perspective, updating and informing planning and housing tools to increase and address local need. This includes supporting housing needs assessments and supporting the right of supply that meets other priorities such as affordability and climate change. Land and infrastructure. Land acquisition and land assembly could unlock a number of sites to quickly allow for development and redevelopment. This could also include the ability to address infrastructure limitations that have otherwise constrained development. Hamilton has a number of areas with challenges included fragmented lot fabric and contamination that such a fund could overcome and liberate lands in key areas close to transit and supportive infrastructure. In terms of incentives, targeted incentives to overcome local supply gaps in both our housing and affordable housing unit numbers would allow Hamilton to clearly articulate and support the development of the right size, location, and cost. With respect to our housing waitlist, currently supply, which in Hamilton has seen year-over-year growth, but has not yet had an impact on reducing our growing access to housing waitlist numbers. Therefore, investments in supply that meaningfully address this growing pressure would result in significant improvements in the household sustainability of families. And finally, a phased approach. While the intent is to accelerate new supply, a phased approach that allowed for existing rental units in danger of losing its affordability as a result of investments such as REITs, or as a result of becoming unsafe to live in as it nears the end of its life cycle, could see immediate and cost-effective protection and support for the growth in affordable rental within the initial phase of the fund. And concurrently, new construction could be initiated, but as we have seen more recently with supply chain issues, be delivered in future years and phases of the funding. In terms of areas of risk and opportunity, I will draw one attention to the market distortion. Any program would need to understand and avoid market distortion. Not all supply is good supply, and oversupply of units that do not meet local objectives could have a destabilizing impact. Targeting. Fund would need to be designed to ensure it does not reward development that was to occur irrespective of the funding. And in terms of capacity building, a program that improves the capacity of trades and nonprofit could result in a sustainable approach to community building, one that could create a long-lasting legacy of supply that goes far beyond the initial investment. My closing comments in summary: ensure the program has the flexibility to address local priorities, is simple and predictable, and most importantly, creates a strong, robust platform to address housing gaps and pressures in a meaningful manner. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. John. Now, Madame Demir for 5 minutes.
Bonjour.
Hello, and thank you. I would like to thank my colleague Coralie Leroux, who is with me here today. This is the first time we've been able to present to a committee such as yours. The Regroupement des Offices d'Habitation du Québec is a not-profit organization that was founded in 1972 and represents the 157 housing offices throughout Quebec. The network of housing offices employs over 1,600 directors and another 2,000 employees as well. Housing offices are responsible for over 52% of all social, community, and affordable housing in Quebec. The housing offices help more than 150,000 low and modest income citizens. As representatives and partners of the Société d'Habitation du Québec and representatives of Quebec municipalities, the housing offices are responsible for approximately 106,000 units, including 65,000 low-income units and 41,000 social, community, and affordable housing units under Affordable Housing Quebec, Accès Logis, and rent supplement programs. As a major stakeholder then in housing in Quebec, we submit this brief and our recommendations. Operating in a business environment that's structured by various laws and regulations, given the public nature of the housing offices and their work, are subjected to strict management and accountability rules based on principles of accountability and transparency with regard to the allocation of housing services to the community, compliance with laws, regulations, standards, and directives as well. Each housing office is governed by a board of directors made up of administrators appointed by the municipality, as well as by the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and tenant representatives as well. Their governance is carried out in accordance with the Code of Ethics. Thus, housing authorities actively contribute to the economic and social development of the urban and rural areas in which they operate. And with this knowledge, we're able to offer some ideas for long-term solutions to the major challenges of housing renovation and development. The offices know how to add value by giving their communities the benefit of collaboration and an integrated approach based on rigor and accountability. We thank you for having us here today. In Quebec, we do feel there is a solution to the important need for housing. The very low vacancy rate at present, the rising rental costs, and significant number of households in core housing need, I mean close to 350,000 households in Quebec, according to the CMHC, must be addressed. A census of federally owned buildings would be a relevant approach to identify and target opportunities for the transformation and construction of social and affordable housing in order to maintain the existing social safety net. The recent pandemic has not only changed the world of work, but also brought to light the importance of housing, in particular social and affordable housing. Identifying federal properties in Quebec and facilitating their conversion to social and affordable housing would be advantageous, responding quickly and effectively to the pressing need of low-income households in core housing need, as well as middle-class households who are increasingly affected by the housing shortage. Favorable conditions related to the transfer of federal properties, where available, encourage the acquisition of these buildings by social developers. In order to optimize the use of public funds from different levels of government, the transfer of federal property should be based on success factors such as free transfer or a sale at a reduced price to social, community, and affordable housing developers. That would be extremely helpful. In the past, social and community housing developers and managers have not easily accessed or appropriate terms for acquiring buildings for conversion or development. However, some projects have succeeded very well in Quebec, and they have been managed by housing authorities, the housing office we're referring to. These projects have promoted the creation of social and community housing and have also allowed various organizations to contribute to this creation and to creating living environments. These projects involving the construction or conversion of federally owned buildings should be part of an approach that includes the following elements: sustainable use of existing buildings, ecological contribution by avoiding new construction where possible, and the development of available land into safe and healthy living environments, and mitigating if not significantly reducing the housing shortage overall. Social and community housing helps us fight poverty and promote the integration of vulnerable people. 10 seconds, please. So we recommend that you provide the right conditions to allow organizations to access land and construct collective social housing. Thank you, Ms. Demers.
Madame Gladue, for 6 minutes, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. I'm going to start with Mr. Thorne from the City of Hamilton. So, I've been to Hamilton quite often, and I know that there, especially in the downtown area, there seems to be not a lot of vacant space and a lot of issues with homelessness, which of course is similar to my riding of Sarnia-Lambton. And so I wondered, what is it the federal government could really do you think, to help create affordable spaces there?
Thank you for the question. And I would say one of them is to partner with the city in one of the most successful programs that we have underway now, which is a fairly robust suite of incentive programs. What we found in our downtown core, and I can imagine Sarnia would be similar, is that the market is not in a place where it can necessarily create the kinds of residential units we'd like to see. And that's why we try to incentivize it with our development charge exemptions, with our zero interest loans, with our brownfield remediation grants and other types of incentives, because that is very much where we want to see a lot of the new housing to happen. But we know that that's not where the market is pushing that housing. So I would say, and that was one of the points I made in my opening comments, was that partnering with municipalities on those types of programs, which currently we are funding entirely on our own, would be helpful.
And I feel strongly that municipalities have their plans. Each one is different, and they have programs that are working for them. And, I'd like to see the federal government come alongside in a way that is not prescriptive. Now, you mentioned tax incentives, zero interest loans, grants to help clean up, all of these different initiatives that are currently funded by the municipality. Would you be open to having the federal government partner to just sort of do what they do in a lot of the programs of the government where, they just give you 50% and you put in 50% or some mathematical formula like that?
Yes, I think that would be helpful. Right now, the scope of those programs is limited by the funding that's available off the municipal levy. And certainly if there's more funding available, the scope and the impact of those programs could be expanded.
And a question for Ms. Demers. You were talking about the transformation of federal buildings, and I know that there are a lot of vacant federal buildings, and this is a really important opportunity to not miss. How can we best work with Quebec and the various places across the country so that we accelerate the creation of affordable spaces in those federal buildings?
Monsieur le Président, merci pour votre question.
Thank you for your question, Chair. We have projects that have been carried out in Quebec, specifically in Montreal and Quebec City, that have involved transforming federal buildings, converting them in partnership with the levels of government within Quebec and the municipalities. How could we make better use of these buildings? Well, thanks to a solid plan, a simple and accessible one as well, of course, with the funding to support a collaborative approach using all levels of government to meet local needs, also respecting investments that have been carried out over the decades to build the buildings themselves. The idea is to allow them to be transformed for new use and to help us out with this important problem.
About how many spaces we think we could create from the buildings that are available in the networks that you're in charge of?
Nous n'avons pas cette donnée de...
We don't have that precise data, but we do recommend, and what we have felt for a number of years now already, is that there's a need for rapid access to at least 5,000 social housing units a year. You would need to be able to access or build 5,000 a year at the very least over the next 5 years to meet current needs, particularly vulnerable client needs and low-income needs.
One of the difficulties we are really struggling with in my riding of Sarnia-Lambton is timely approval. There are multiple subdivisions and various builds that are being delayed. Usually it's a lack of coordination in my mind between the Conservation Authority, the municipality. If there's environmental permitting from the province that's needed, these things are spinning very slowly. And so I wondered, Mr. John, if you would have any comments on what you think is needed there to move these things along more quickly.
Thank you for the question. And certainly coordination is that key piece when you look towards timely approvals. I think Hamilton, in terms of its approach, has really looked at what we can do to concurrently have those timelines work together so that we do deliver in a fast response. I think where in Hamilton we suffer challenges is particularly with the contamination and the response ministerially on many of our record of site conditions and how that slows down, particularly on the affordable housing portfolio. Those are the sites which are most typically challenged when it comes to the fact that they are often more affordable for those willing to develop affordability, but at the same time present long-term challenges. So coordination from a ministerial perspective, as well as some of the internal changes, would help deliver that. But I do believe that from a Hamilton's perspective, a lot of time and effort has done to look at which kind of approaches can be done concurrently and to allow that to deliver affordability as well as housing approvals in a very timely fashion.
Very good.
Thank you, Madame Gladue.
I'm done. Thanks. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, witnesses.
But it was a good question, good answer. Mr. Collins for six minutes.
Yep, thanks, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the witnesses. My first question is for Mr. Thorne. There's a narrative that's being spread across the country that the gatekeepers are holding us up as it relates to supply, and so can I get your perspective on where we are at with new units as it relates to the creation of new units and the approval process? I know that in Hamilton and the GTHA, there have been a record number of units over the last number of years that have been created, and so I'm trying to understand where this narrative comes from as it relates to demonizing the gatekeepers or municipalities and residents who come out to appear in front of municipal councils to speak to issues related to new supplies. So could you comment on that in terms of where you're at with new units and what you see ahead of us in 2022, 2023?
Thank you for the question. So in 2021 in the city of Hamilton, and I don't think we're alone on this in the province of Ontario, we had a record-setting year from all time in terms of the number of residential units that were created in the city. And not just residential, we had a record year for industrial, we had a record year for commercial, we had a record year for overall construction value. We exceeded over $2 billion in construction value in the city, which is far and away a record. So we are seeing significant increase in approvals and in supply. I'm also quite pleased to say that pre-COVID we had seen some of our faster approvals that we have seen. We do track all types of different development applications and approval timelines, and in some cases had seen 100 or more days shaved off the approval timelines. So I would not, as with any process, I think processes can always be improved and made more efficient. But the record for the past couple of years is that we are seeing record levels of development activity in our city and certainly in other cities in Ontario.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'll go to Mr. John next. Mr. John, you know what the wait list looks like in Hamilton and many other municipalities. It's at an all-time high in terms of sheer numbers. I think when I left, there were 6,200 families and individuals who were on the affordable housing wait list, and they were waiting 3 or 4 years on average to secure a home. And so can I ask through you, one of the main goals of the fund is to increase supply, but increase affordable supply. And so I know we have a long track record in Hamilton of partnering with the private sector to not just create units, but to create affordable units. And so can you elaborate on how the fund might incentivize the private sector to partner with the affordable housing community as it relates to creating new units, but not just new units, affordable units?
Thank you for the question. And certainly, yes. So in Hamilton, we actually have a number of examples where we've worked collaboratively with the development arm of a number of local organizations to not only build and intensify areas, but do so by allowing affordability and also addressing local needs through that. We have one example in our East End, an economically challenged area, however, great access to highways and to infrastructure as well as the future LRT. And we took the advantage of using municipal incentives to ensure that the additional density that was created at those sites delivered on those local needs. So through pretty much our only true direct financial supports being development charges and parkland exemptions, we were able to actually encourage a full rehabilitation of a former City Housing Hamilton site to deliver over 1,000 units with over 350 of those in rental tenure. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, rental tenure is a challenge in Hamilton. And then on top of that, we're able to get those rental tenure actually delivered at some affordable rates below market. As likewise, we also did a home ownership program, once again, looking at that missing middle. How do we develop and provide for housing below market, but also allowing for people to build equity in homes and go forward? So we built and predicated our funding approach on mixed income, building complete communities, and basically liberating what was a socioeconomically challenged area that had much infrastructure to support the residents that we know would be flourishing in that area. And we've done so, and it's pulling permits right now and certainly delivering units far below that of the market. It's the ability to continue and build on those. We only had a limited amount of incentives coming from the city's levy. We could have done far greater depths of affordability had we had any other financial supports through that process.
Thanks, Mr. John. And I'll switch gears to Mr. Thorne. You have presented a number of recommendations that mirror those that have been provided by other witnesses from across the country. One of them, I think one of the top of the list has been land acquisition. And so can you elaborate on what the municipality would do with either the purchase of existing units, existing buildings, or vacant lots?
Thanks for the question. So with existing buildings, what we have seen is the loss of some of the affordable rental, market-owned affordable rental that we have. And I think being able to acquire and protect some of those for long-term affordability would provide great value. We also in Hamilton have a number of sites that are vacant, that are underutilized, that are pre-zoned and development ready, but are not necessarily in the hands or in the situation of someone who's looking to develop those properties in the short term. So the ability to kind of unlock some of that housing, some of that land supply, to de-risk those properties. We do deal with a number of brownfield contamination issues that can hold back development. To assemble what can often be smaller fragmented parcels. These are things that all create impediments to development. So where municipalities can be engaged to try to unlock some of that land supply and get some of that land back into productive use and onto the market, I think we could add great value.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. And Madame Chabot pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, I just need to remove my mask. Thank you to our witnesses. Thank you for being here with us today. The study we're carrying out is somewhat exploratory. We do know that the government has decided to put $4 billion over a number of years to build a good deal of housing units and is making a good deal of low-income housing. It will be important, of course, to come up with an adequate definition of affordable housing, as well as see how fairness can, be respected. Is this being done in the right way? So thank you for your opinions on this. My first question will be for Ms. Demers. Ms. Demers, may I wish you a good 50th anniversary. This is the first time you've come before our committee as well. And I see that your group has been devoted to people in need of housing for 50 years now, including the most vulnerable in our society, the most in need. So many years of community work. Bravo. I have read the brief that you have given us, mostly covering Quebec, but you did underscore earlier the issue of fairness. A fair strategy, the urbanization strategy, you wrote this in 2021. You say that social housing must not only be seen but also understood by governments as a strategic land use technique to ensure fair access to housing. Could you tell us a bit more about fairness in access to housing? I could let my colleague, if you wish, speak more to this. Thank you for the question. It would be Ms. Leroux who would be in best position to answer. Thank you. Indeed, when it comes to fair access to the housing market, well, when you have market cost rents, that is quite a different thing than a rental cost that's based on vulnerable people's actual income. So affordable housing is usually aiming for a median level rent, but is that really adequate for the truly vulnerable whom we are trying to help, trying to keep housed? So there you have to start asking, what's your client base? So what about equity? What about fairness? In supply, you really need to know right up who you're addressing, what your community is, who your client is. So I agree. We need to come up with a definition of low income. It would be of the greatest importance to develop a good definition of who the client is, what low income is, and therefore what affordable is. I don't think that everyone has done that. Thank you. My second question. Now, we know that this would be a construction plan to build new units. But when it comes to affordable housing, and several witnesses have come to tell us that the demand is for rental, affordable rental housing, it's not just a matter of creating the building. You also have to ensure long-term affordability of that building. Could the fund we're considering help not only build new buildings, but also renovate, let's say, units that already exist, but that could be renovated to make them available at low cost? Thank you for the question. Yes, indeed. In our view, building is not necessarily greenfielding, building an entirely new building. It can also involve making good use of existing possibilities, federal buildings, for example, or developers' ability to transform current buildings into social housing. This would surely speed up our ability to increase supply. For low-income citizens and for whom this is a essential need for family health, but also for middle-income families who are having more and more trouble renting appropriate housing at a reasonable cost, and therefore affordable cost, which is more or less 30% of the family income. Yes, we do know the definition of affordability can cover a lot of ground. You did bring up some criteria earlier, and it's true not everyone has the same definition of low income or affordability. Do you think that at the federal level, perhaps programming would benefit from a common definition of affordability? Do you have one? We have held discussions about the definition of affordability, and these discussions are ongoing. Overall, what I can say is that the goal, which is felt by all, is to respond to the core needs of vulnerable clients. which is the principal client of the Office d'Habitation, as well, of course, as middle-income clients. So this requires working together and communicating about our understanding of the situation and of the definition. For example, in order to be able to go ahead with this good programming. With your permission, I will add that we suggest that developers who do have a good deal of background knowledge, they do manage these clients, 10 seconds, but also they know how to develop the right housing for them. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chabot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank so much for the witnesses today. And I wanted to thank the witnesses from the City of Hamilton for giving us that inside view. So I wanted to go back to something that Mr. Thorne said. And Mr. Thorne, I'm going to ask you a question on this. But you mentioned to have a clarified goal. And, you know, I'm not sure that that the Housing Accelerator Fund has a clarified goal. Looking at initially what it was mentioned as housing supply to be increased in the largest cities everywhere in the country, creating 100,000 new middle-class homes by 2024-2025, application based to offer municipalities the opportunity to grow housing supply, increase densification, speed up approval times, these sort of things. But really what this conversation has been about and over the last few weeks in this committee is really the need to address the core housing needs of the communities. And it's really moved towards rental housing, not-for-profit housing, which is really not the same thing as the way the Housing Accelerator Fund was positioned at the beginning. So I think we really do need to get an idea of what this housing affordability or this Housing Accelerator Fund needs to do, because I'd like to focus specifically on the rental housing. And in our testimony back on the 16th of May, we heard from the Executive Director of Neighbourhood Land Trust around the fact that we need to start protecting some of this rental housing, affordable rental housing that already exists. I heard it again today. I would just ask Mr. Thorne if you could give us a little bit more information for testimony around what you think the Housing Accelerator Fund can do to protect purpose-built rental, low-income rental, rental that's going to address core need in this community, and how saving that or protecting that could be faster than new construction.
And thank you for the question, and I'll offer a couple of thoughts. One, and I think I've heard it from other witnesses as well, is around the direct acquisition by either municipalities or housing providers of some of that low cost rental housing that is market housing, but is at risk of escalating rents. I think that it would be a useful part of the program. I don't want to shortchange as well, though, the supply side of incentivizing and supporting new supply for rental. And that can be market rental, because if we don't do that, then we're going to direct that investment to some of the existing rental stock that we already have in acquisition of those in the private marketplace and upscaling of the rents in those locations. So I do think there is an acquisition component to that. I also think there is a component of acquisition of vacant lands in order to build new rental stock. And I would agree with the premise of the question that from my standpoint, it is a bit unclear in terms of where the focus of this program would be. And I would suggest that increasing housing supply is very important, but that cannot be agnostic to the important questions of affordability, of tenure, of type, of location, of environmental performance, I think are equally important goals.
Thank you very much. And then I will go to Mr. John just around the work that the cities have been doing to get affordable housing, to get purpose-built rental on the ground. So you mentioned a few of the different density bonusing, maybe parking relaxations, density transfers, all of the things that the cities have had to do on their own without having support from the federal government. So I wonder if you could just clarify what are the types of carrots rather than sticks that the federal government could help cities with, so that cities don't have to put the burden on the community to increase density, relax parking regulations, give up things in the community just to get that affordable housing built. If you could just be a little bit clearer on what the federal government could do there.
Thank you for the question. And absolutely, I think, paramount to this is building those complete communities. So this isn't sacrificing one for the delivery of affordability. I think affordability needs to be in the lexicon of every new development. It needs to be understood that, it is a pressing need, but it is the right response for every community to accommodate the needs of every single resident. As I mentioned, I think the federal government has had a number of funding envelopes which have actually supported in various elements of our housing spectrum the delivery of housing units. And my understanding from the Housing Acceleration Fund is that this isn't necessarily focused on deep affordability but supply. However, similar to previous comments today, we can actually target that supply so that we're actually addressing local housing need. And as I mentioned, rental housing is one of the key pieces in Hamilton. We've struggled to build new rental housing. The market is not strong, so any fund that can support the offsetting of those long-term costs for building rental tenure in Hamilton would be a significant step forward to addressing some of that. The other piece too is the operating side. So we also have a rich number of housing providers who deliver affordable housing, and I think engaging them in the discussion, understanding what those needs are from an operating perspective and a pro forma perspective will allow us to get meaningful rental in the right locations at the right household composition, and delivering to those families in most need of sustainability. So, beyond just the direct financial tools the city is offering in terms of development charges and parkland dedication dispensations, I think you've picked up on a number of those planning related pieces too. Parking, often the requirement for over provision of parking is a barrier towards rental and affordable housing. I think we have to look at how we build in mixed income. So how do we build a building that can both appeal to those of lower economic means, but also be a building that removes stigma from affordability, but also builds a complete community within towers themselves. We have to stop looking at neighborhoods as individual units, but as buildings that are organic and delivering key messages throughout the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Zarillo and Mr. John. Now to Madame Kuzi for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, before we go back to questioning the witnesses on the study at hand, I just wanted to turn back to our guest of 1 week ago, the Minister of Family, Children's Services and Social Development, and the issue of passports. And I was very pleased to see my colleague, Ms. Gladue, prominently featured in the media, asking not only about service delays to this point, Chair, but what are the plans for the future? And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm presenting a motion putting this on notice here today, right now, so that the wishes, I think, of not only Ms. Gladue, but of all Canadians can be fulfilled in making sure that the government is staying on track with not only passport delivery, but of course all services coming out of Service Canada. So the motion is as follows, and I have it here, Mr. Chair, in both official languages, that given the recent reports of passport renewal delays, the committee send for, from Service Canada, a weekly progress report including the number of passport requests in the previous week, the number of passports cleared in the previous week, the current backlog, the number of express passports processed in the previous week for travel within 25 days, the number of express passports processed in the previous week for travel within 5 days, and a resume of trends over the last 4 weeks. I, myself, Mr. Chair, as a former consul for Canada, would also be interested in seeing these numbers. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will now pass the opportunity to ask questions on to Mr. Leipert. Thank you very much.
Mr. Leipert.
Thank you to all the witnesses this morning. Kathy, I have a quick question, and then I'm going to see if there's still time. My colleague might have another question for the witnesses. Despite what we heard this morning from our guest from Hamilton, the thing that I continually hear from developers and construction folks in Calgary is the delays and the costs associated with municipal regulations and barriers. It tends to seem like municipalities, it's a blame game. The contractors blame municipalities in some degree, blame the province blames the feds, and the feds end up blaming everybody else combined, so hence the accelerator fund. The minister was here last week, and I'm not sure I got the right answer, but I'd like to hear from you. What can municipalities do from a measurement standpoint to actually see that if this accelerator fund was designed to clear away some of the hurdles, how is that going to be measured to make sure that we're actually getting there and getting our value for money?
It's a great question. And I do agree that there is always a blame game. The Alberta provincial government has been very focused on red tape reduction. And in their attempts to reduce their provincial red tape, a lot of that has been downloaded as red tape onto municipalities. We are constantly being asked to jump through hoops to achieve their goals. So, it's a question very much probably more for the planning department at my municipality. But I can tell you that at the municipal level, our goal is to act, especially in a mid-sized city range. And I'd like to add that, a lot of the housing product does end up in the bigger cities of Edmonton and Calgary. Yet you have my municipality right on the outskirts. With good projects, we've got a piece of land in our downtown core that we're giving to our housing foundation, but they'll need to have it as mixed housing. It can't be completely subsidized because we need some of the market housing to offset the below market. If this accelerator fund could, just help those foundations increase the number of doors, then we're just bringing the same number of doors are being developed, but it'll create a higher percentage of those that are subsidized as those that are not. But as for the red tape and the reduction, our level of government, I can quite proudly say is worked very hard because this is such a priority for us. I'm actually currently in Regina at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities conference. It was the number one topic we spoke of this entire 5 days of conferencing is how to get more housing product on and what can we do as municipalities. So things like parking regulations, we can do that and we should be doing that. So, we can create toolkits if you need for municipalities to adjust their level, their realm of responsibility, and then work more closely with the provincial government. I think that's always key, is working closely.
Thank you.
Your time has concluded. Thank you for your question, and Ms. Herron for the answer. Mr. Van Bynen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will be sharing my time with Mr. Couteau, so if you could stop me at 2.5 minutes, I'd appreciate that. My question goes to Ms. Herron. What criteria do you think should be used to determine which municipalities are able to access the building funds, either the municipality or their housing service providers? I know that there's different needs in different municipalities, and I know there was the suggestion that these funds could be distributed on the same basis as the gas tax distribution. What are your thoughts on that, and what should be the criteria? And secondly, what should be the measurable, achievable, realistic, and controllable goals that the municipalities should sign on to be eligible for those funds?
Great question, and I'm not exactly sure. I would focus on the same measure as the gas tax because the needs are different in different municipalities. One of the things that I think would really be beneficial to getting more housing on the market is a regional approach, and I say that as an example, in my area, we are in the Edmonton Metro Region Board, and we work together as a board to address our priorities for transportation, for example, and then we submit a list to the province and say these are the projects we would like funded. That could absolutely happen with a housing file. Each municipality identifies their need, their projects, and I also think doing it at a regional approach does sort of distribute the housing amongst each other. So, because right now in a municipality such as mine, if I can't house them, they end up in Edmonton, which contributes to a lot of the social problems that are happening in the bigger cities. So I think that would be a great criteria. And I also think the ability to get it out there fast.
Okay, I wonder if Mr. Johns or Mr. Thorne could answer that question as well.
Yes, I'll add one quick comment. One thing I like about the gas tax model is the certainty and predictability of the funding, and I think that's really important, especially in something like development approvals, which is something that does sort of have you're in it for the long game, and that predictability of funding would be key. What I would suggest in terms of the first part of the question around what municipalities would have to do to access the funding, I would suggest that it's reasonable to have some policy gateposts in place. There is not much point with the federal government putting funding into missing middle housing if municipal zoning bylaws do not permit missing middle housing. So I think having those types of policy gateposts in place would be a reasonable expectation from municipal partners.
Okay.
As requested, now Mr. Coteau for the last.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is to Jason Thorne, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. You mentioned brownfield sites being used to increase supply. I know that in Toronto, the Canary District, for example, was built on contaminated property, and it just really transformed that area of the city. So I've always looked at brownfield sites as huge opportunities, and according to a recent report I read, there's about 30,000 brownfield sites across the country, across Canada. I know you mentioned, putting grants forward to help developers purchase land, but I've also heard from people involved in industry that there's being concerned over long-term litigation from contaminants, so getting the right insurance policies and sometimes not being available. Are there issues like that or other issues that you've encountered as a planner that make brownfield sites harder for developers to use and cities to utilize?
Yes, thanks for the question. I would say certainly for some of the larger brownfield sites, those off-site impacts and de-risking the off-site impacts become a significant issue. A lot of what we see in Hamilton, though, when we talk about the brownfield sites, it's less about the large-scale former industrial sites. You see a lot of old dry cleaners and gas stations and those types of uses deep in the urban fabric, smaller parcels, contamination issues that are not as significant as a major former industrial site. Those are a lot of the ones that we tend to invest in terms of the grants that we put forward, the tax grants that we put in to do the site remediation and cleanup costs, and especially those smaller scale sites. Given that you're going to get a smaller scale development project on those sites, provides very little financial resources for a developer to fund those sorts of cleanups on their own. And yet these sort of, again, a lot of older gas stations, dry cleaners are two common ones, tend to be in locations that actually are very amenable to infill intensification. They're often on some of our urban transit routes, really ideal locations for redevelopment. But financial support is needed to overcome that initial brownfield barrier.
See that as a huge opportunity for the government to invest in when it comes to brownfield site cleanups as potentially one of the components of an accelerator fund?
Yes, I do. It is certainly one of the most successful programs that we've had in our municipality. As I said earlier, we're somewhere around 20 years of having those programs in place. And it has been quite successful in bringing lands to market that otherwise would not have been able to do so. But we are limited in terms of our own resources, and what we grant back to the developer is as a component of the tax uplift that their development creates. That's a limited pool of funds. It is limited by the uplift that's created. And certainly other funding partners in a program like that would allow us to expand the scope and the reach.
Thank you, Mr. Coteau and Mr. Thorne. Madame Chabot and then Madame Zarillo to conclude the questioning. Madame Chabot for 2
minutes, Madam. Thank you, and 2.5 minutes. Yes, 2.5. I will have 2 questions for Ms. Demers. We have received here as a witness, and you likely know her, Ms. Cyr from Bâtir son quartier, Building Your Neighborhood. She gave us a message that I find important, to the effect that the fund, the $4 billion over 5 years that we're considering, is basically supply-oriented, whereas the demand is really quite strong for rental housing, affordable rental. So this new fund to create new housing units, and of course I understand that developers will be asked to promote mostly community housing, social housing. Do you think that a certain percentage should be earmarked for affordable rental units? Because the private market, that good friend, doesn't really necessarily need our help. It's sort of independent. So how much should be going for affordable rental housing? Do you have an opinion? Very good question. An opinion, yes. A precise figure, no. We do agree that it's important to ensure a balanced housing supply. But what we see now is the much higher need among low-income families and middle-income families as well. Essentially, this program must be developed and drawn up with this in mind. This is the need. We certainly hope to have fewer and fewer citizens in the street, which is why we need a considerable social net to ensure that people don't wind up homeless. And to do so, we need to have a mixed clientele in the housing units. Some of the programming, then, must be set aside for that need. One last question. Are there any specifics? I take advantage of your being here, Ms. Demers, to put the question. Any specifics that we should keep in mind for people with disabilities? Yes, for persons with disabilities, we should be able to keep their needs in mind. Of course, that means adapted housing at acceptable prices so that they will be able to stay in their neighborhoods, rethinking the affordable housing already in their neighborhoods for them. But others have mentioned predictability. We need predictable funding and a predictable framework. But to meet the needs of persons with disabilities, that becomes more important. The same as for seniors. We need to have a long-term plan to adapt to these ongoing needs. Thank you, Ms. Chabot and Ms. Demers.
For the last questions, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to ask my question to Mr. John. And I just want to thank the witnesses today because, you know, the witness testimony is so powerful in these committees. I mean, one sentence can lead a recommendation, can change a recommendation, can change the path of the Housing Accelerator Fund. So, you know, this Housing Accelerator Fund came to this committee to study, and it is our opportunity to impact what that might look like. So going back to the idea that, you know, perhaps the goal of the fund is not clearly stated and is not necessarily meeting the need of core housing or what's needed right now. I wanted to ask Mr. John around the criteria. So we had the Minister of Housing here last week, and I asked about accessible housing, and I was told that a portion of any housing that's funded through the Housing Accelerator Fund would need to be accessible. Madame Chabot has brought up many times about the affordability. What's that criteria? What does it look like? So I guess I would ask you, Mr. John, what have you heard? Is there a clear understanding of what the criteria is to access this funding? And do you have a definition for affordable housing and accessible housing that should or could be in this funding criteria?
Thank you for the question, and it is an excellent one. And I think during my opening comments, I talked about flexibility because I do think we need to deliver the housing that's right for the community and where it will reside. And so I think, you know, when it comes to the definitions, as much as it will provide predictability, we are looking for that flexibility. And surely the fairest definition of affordability is you know, that meets the needs of the individual. It is based on their ability to pay for that unit. And I think that would be the fairest approach to that. Similar when it comes to the tenure. I know Hamilton has a great need for rental tenure, and particularly accessible rental tenure. Often those with disabilities struggle to find rental tenure that actually meets their needs. I would push that many of those options are determined at the local level, and what I would really stress is that it is not a punitive approach. Guidelines of predictability are important, but I think instead of looking at punitive measures, I think what you do is look towards bonusing those that are actually taking this fund and delivering and meeting through leveraging all other abilities that they have as a municipality to deliver on local housing need. So ultimately, any opportunity to take a sum of money and then demonstrate in response back to the federal government on how we've taken that money, leveraged it, and actually delivered on local housing needs should be a priority and a bonus opportunity, as opposed to a punitive approach where every municipality is forced with a certain percentage of accessibility or a certain definition of affordability. I think there is an opportunity there to work flexibly within the system, provide clear guidelines, but also allow to bonus the ability of the municipality to demonstrate where they've shown leadership and where they've shown commitment to the individual housing needs of their community.
And just quickly, Mr. Thorne, Mr. Thorne, you mentioned REITs. I just wanted to get an understanding of how REITs might be impacting your community.
A short answer, please.
We are seeing the acquisition of some of our formerly affordable rental and with renovation of those units and putting them back on market at a higher rate.
And how's that affecting people that were in those low affordable units?
Go ahead, Mr. Thorne.
Sorry,
I
Mr.
apologize,
Thorne.
I didn't hear that second question.
And how is that affecting people that were in those affordable units? How's that affecting them on the ground?
So we are certainly seeing increased homelessness. We're seeing increased demand for shelter space, and we are seeing increases in the number of people who are underhoused or in insufficient housing, and that is certainly a significant concern in our city.
Thank you, Mr. Thorne and Madame Zerillo. That concludes the witness. But before the witnesses go, I take liberty as chair. Mr. John, you made reference to an ownership model that you were using. Could you provide that model to the committee in writing, the committee clerk? You didn't have a chance to expand on it, but you alluded to a housing option model that led to ownership. I, for one, would be very interested in seeing the details of that model, and if you could provide it to the committee in writing. Mr. John?
Absolutely. I'd be more than happy to provide those program details, for which we've done locally.
Thank you. And thank you to all the witnesses for appearing today and sharing your understanding. You are the individuals that are on the ground. You know the situation, and it's very helpful to the committee as we formulate conclusions on this study and recommendations. So with that, thank you, witness, for appearing. We will suspend the committee meeting for a few minutes while we move in camera. Let's give it 5 minutes. Thank you, witnesses.